This is the NES 30 Pro Bluetooth controller. I've done a video on it before repairing these shoulder buttons, but today's video is going to be a little bit different and not for everyone, so heed warning there. Aside from the one issue that I've encountered with this, which is the shoulder buttons breaking off, I have the screws undone, so don't mind the little gap there. But aside from that one issue, it's a fantastic little controller, and I want to make it more usable for my needs. When they designed this controller, clearly they were going after the SNES look, and that came with a compromise on the button layout. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that has complaints about this, but I feel like it's, you know, it's manageable for other people, but for me it's not. It still bothers me. And that is the button layout, the A, B, Y, X layout. On your standard Xbox One, Xbox 360 controller, you have B, A, X, Y, which is, you know, standard. And like these buttons correlate with PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4, and the games that are for both systems have like the same layout. So Y is triangle for PlayStation 2, and Y is to get in and out of a car in Grand Theft Auto, for example, and triangle is to get in and out of a car in Grand Theft Auto, for example. So when they went with this layout, it doesn't match the one that most of us are used to by now. So it's a bit of a learning curve for games that are ported over. Like, for example, they have several Grand Theft Autos available on the Android market. They have Bully, Max Payne, PlayStation 1 emulators that detect this controller automatically, and just a bunch of stuff that uses the standard layout when it detects a gamepad of the BAXY, which this lacks. So for example, if I were to press the Y button here, I'd get in and out of a car for Grand Theft Auto, but the same Y button over here acts as the same command, but it's not in the same spot as this. It's actually over here. So there's like a weird memory there, because for the past, you know, decade or so, I've been playing PlayStation and Xbox pressing the Y button up here to get in and out of a car. So when they ported those games over to Android, you kind of have to learn to push this button instead. And I don't want to, because that is very annoying. It's also really annoying when you load a PlayStation 1 emulator on your phone or something like that, and it automatically detects this gamepad, and it just basically reroutes all the key mappings you might have done in the software, and makes this Y button right here the triangle. So again, you'd have to relearn where the triangle button technically is. So this video is going to be about physically remapping buttons, and it's really it's not for everyone if you don't know how to solder or if you don't have any experience with surface mount soldering, because it will get kind of complicated. But I'm basically just going to make the Y button, the X button, the B button, the A button, and I'm going to follow suit with the BAXY. So once I'm done with it, the Y button will now be up here, and the A button down here, X over here, and B over here. So it's going to be a really fun project, and I'm not too concerned about breaking this controller because I've had it for about 2 years. I've had to repair it so many times, and I think it's a mod that I can do easily because I do this type of stuff for work, jumping etches and whatnot. But before I get into the nitty-gritty, I want to explain how this mod is going to work on pen and paper so you can further understand the idea, and then we will get started with it. Okay, so I have Grand Theft Auto Vice City playing on my tablet right here. I have the 8-bit do controller hooked up. So let's go ahead and get inside of the car. Now normally when you're playing Grand Theft Auto, like I mentioned before, you'd press the Y button on any console or the triangle and you'd get inside of your car. But with the 8-bit do NES 30 Pro, X doesn't get you into your car. It actually acts as square and causes you to jump. So let's use the Y button to get into the car. Just like that. So I'm going to press the Y button now, which is over here. And we get it in the car. Now it gets even worse when you want to drive, because you have to remember the controls and then flip them. So acceleration is now over here, and reverse is right here. It's X, I think. So, you know, even after dealing with this controller for a couple of years, I still haven't gotten used to it because I'm so used to the layout with Xbox and PlayStation controllers. So as you can see, it has its kind of bugs in that area. So let's go over to pen and paper now and show you exactly how this mod is going to be accomplished. So following the layout of this controller, we have our keys as shown. We have X right here, B down here, Y, and A right here. And just for comparison, our standard layout is usually B, A, X, and Y. This is what we want to achieve over here. So now let's just go down here and actually draw some switches to represent the layout up top. And we have another one right here. and one over here. Now these are just standard tactile switch symbols that you'd find on like Eagle and whatnot, but they will serve a great purpose. Now with the NES 30 Pro controller and a lot of game controllers out there, they have two sides to a switch. One side of the switch goes to ground. So this side right here, all of these have a common connection closing to ground. And the other side of the switches go to a microcontroller or some sort of high voltage that will detect when the button is pressed to ground, aka going low or to 0, and that will tell the controller the button has been pressed and the command has been activated. So these signals right here go off to a microcontroller that's inside the NES 30 Pro. And the idea behind this is to take two signals and cross them over one another by cutting the etches and jumping them with very thin, probably 30 gauge wire. So how this is going to work is we have our X button right here and our Y button right here. And we want to emulate the Y button up top and the X button over here. So how we're going to do this is actually kind of simple. It's going to be very small work. So like I said, if you're not used to this type of work, don't give it a try. You might damage your controller. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to physically cut the edges that are connecting the buttons to their respective paths on the microcontroller. And then we'll take the microcontroller side for Y, for example, and we'll jump it over here to run through the top button. And then we will do the same for the X button. So we'll take the path right here that's going to the microcontroller, and then we will jump it to close through the switch where Y used to be. This way you'll actually get the button presses you want. So when you press the X key over here, or the what was Y key right here, you'll actually close the X signal to ground through the Y position. We're going to do the same thing for the A and B buttons over here. But it's actually really simple, and if we can trace the buttons to the microcontroller, we can actually cut the etches from the microcontroller, and that way we don't have to add any like buildup of wires underneath the buttons. So if we do it all close to the microcontroller, it'd be really easy, and it really shouldn't be that time consuming either. So let's open up this controller and see what we're looking at. So we have the controller taken apart and we can see the insides of it. So what we're going to do now is find out which side of the switch is ground and which side of the switch goes to the microcontroller. The microcontroller is right here. It is an ARM processor, I believe, and these switches over here go directly to it. So let's find out which one is ground. The easiest way to find ground is to find something on the board that has polarity. Right here is a micro USB port. I know basically by heart which pin is the negative 5 volts input. So if we just probe that and then touch one of these pads over here, we should hear it beep. Right there is our ground. So that means that this pin, or this pad right here, is actually our signal. So if we take that signal and reference it to this chip, we should hear a beep. So right there is our signal for this button, which I believe is Y. So that is our signal for Y. So now I'm going to do this for the rest of the buttons and get a table and then pretty much find out where they are on the chip to better visualize it, and then start cutting and jumping some etches. Using my multimeter, I was able to find out where the signals are going from button to chip, and I have it right here as shown. This is the microprocessor that is on the circuit board itself. It has a little circle right here that indicates where it sits on the board, and I used that to kind of assign my own numbers for it, so that way I have some sort of idea of where the pins are and what I'm doing to them. And it's as shown. The X signal is going to pin 9, the Y signal is going to pin 8, the B signal is going to pin 24, and the A signal is going to pin 23. So we kind of lucked out there. The pins that we were crossing are right next to each other, so it's going to be really easy to solder. So what we're going to be doing is, again, just cutting the etches and jumping them. So I'll show you right here. This is the package as shown on the board. The number pinout probably does not match that of the data sheet, so don't assume that it does. This is just for me to better understand it. So the Y and X are right next to each other, and we want to cross them to kind of switch places. So what we're going to do is just draw these traces real quick. We're just going to cut the etches and jump them. It's really that simple. So this is the package. These are the pins on the chip, and these are the traces going to the buttons themselves. So what we're going to do is actually physically cut the traces going to the buttons, so that way they're not connected anymore. And then we're going to take a small 30 gauge wire and jump it from, say, pin 8 to the trace of pin 9. So that way when you press Y, it's going through the X connection, which will then close around like it normally would. And then we're going to do the same for pin 9. Take a 30 gauge wire. It's going to get a little bit confusing right now. And connect it to the trace of pin 8. So that way when you press X, it'll ground through pin Y. And then we will have our forced remap locations for the buttons. This is kind of like an overkill, I think, maybe. I don't know. I'm still going to do it. But people have suggested using apps and stuff like that to kind of make your own profile for buttons and stuff. And I really don't want to do that because I have several devices I use this controller on, and I don't want to have to keep installing software just to get the buttons that I want. So this is a more permanent way to do this, to just kind of like avoid the whole software side of it and just go right into the nitty-gritty, cut some traces, and solder some stuff. So I couldn't record the process of this, so I took some pictures instead. I just cut the etches, stripped some of the solder mask away and tinned it, and then just soldered some wires to the pins and crossed them over to the pads. I did this for both sides of it as well. Alright, so it's complete. All the etches are jumped. They look pretty secure as well. I went ahead and put super glue over the etches that I jumped and over the wires just to give them some extra strain relief so nothing happens when I close this up. But nothing should happen, but just in case, you never want any like shock to jostle anything loose. So let's test it out and see if it works now. So that should be Y, and that works just fine. So now reverse should be the new square button, which is right there, and it's working just fine. So now I should be able to drive, which would be the new X button, and that's working just fine. So let's get out and press the new B button, which should be a punch, if I remember correctly. Yep, so it is working just fine now. Look at that. Alright, cool. So let's go ahead and close this thing up and have some fun with it. So I have the controller all closed up now, and we're just going to play some Grand Theft Auto just to see that it's still working. Press Y to get in this car, which is the X location. A to drive, which is the B location, and then X to reverse, which is the Y location, and just to see that B is working, which is the A location, and it is. It's all working fine now. One thing that I wasn't able to change is the placements of the actual buttons with the keys marked on it. The reason for that is because these were made by the company to actually fit the correct channels, so that way no one can mix them up. There's little plastic tabs that I could break off, but then the keys will just fall right out of the controller, so I'm just going to leave them in there. I'm not going to worry about that because I don't look at it anyways to play the game, because if I did look at it, this mod would be pointless. But yeah, it works great now, and I get to play all these ported games as well as emulators, because PS1 emulators would detect this controller and load its profile, and then the triangle button would still be over here, so this mod fixes that. So all I ended up doing was just taking the signals for each key and rerouting them to fit the Xbox and PlayStation profile of the BAXY. Really easy mod. Surface mount stuff is kind of challenging to some people, but with practice you will get it, trust me. And it was a lot of fun to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments on this controller specifically, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next time.